because halotestin makes you so irritable. You're literally the Hulk. You're walking around like Bruce Banner, and at the moment's notice, you're ready to snap at the smallest thing. The smallest thing. You think tren is bad? Halotestin is tren on steroids on check drops. Vigorous Steve here with another episode of Is It Worth It or Not? On previous episodes, we already discussed which injectable anabolic androgenic steroid is worth taking contextually speaking. I mean, there's always a particular context or reason why you would want to add a steroid or another performance-enhancing drug to your protocol. On those previous videos, we covered pretty much the most popular and commonly used injectable steroids. And in this series, where we're continuing onwards to the oral anabolic androgenic steroids, but there's still 3 popular, commonly used, and somewhat readily available oral steroids that we still didn't discuss. Actually, it's 4 of them. We have Oxymetholone, Anadrol, and its metabolite Mestanolone, which is also available as a pharmaceutical. There's Methenolone Acetate, Primobolan tablets, and of course, Halotestin Fluoxymesterone. So those 3 I want to discuss in this video, but when you look at the list, the entire list of oral anabolic androgenic steroids which is available, the list is freaking long. And most of them I can't find any anecdotal evidence or hands-on experience of. So the other 2 videos that I could potentially make about pro-hormones, designer steroids, oral steroid medications which were branded FDA approved at one point or another and used in very limited clinical settings, albeit that most of these oral steroids are either no longer available or completely unsourceable, almost no anecdotal experience, just people asking, hey, where can I find compound XYZ? There's a lot of oral steroids which were designed and developed but never brought to market, so they were never available as a pharmaceutical, never FDA approved. The list is long, but out of all of these compounds that I could still discuss in another video, I think the only one I want to limit myself to is the pro-hormone or designer steroid Epistain, also known as Havoc, which you can actually find the raws of, so that is available on the underground lab scene. Tetrahydrogestrinone, abbreviated to THG, also known as the Clear, which was developed by Patrick Arnold in collaboration with Victor Conte and distributed by Balco. The Clear was specifically designed to beat the drug test. And I believe that this compound was used by many different athletes all over all kinds of sports, which were able to beat the drug test until inevitably a doping test came to market to test for tetrahydrogestrinone. And, well, Victor Conte and Balco got a lot of lawsuits and a lot of issues out of that. So I could discuss that one. I can discuss Bolasterone, brand name Myogen. And then the last one which I can discuss is Methyl-1 testosterone, abbreviated to M1T, which apparently there are raws for, and I've also seen Methyl-1 testosterone on some of the underground labs, which was, I believe, also a pro-hormone at one point or another, or at least until the Steroid Control Act got updated in 2014 to include designer steroids. Methyl-1 testosterone is basically methylated dihydroboldenone, so it's an oral version of injectable dihydroboldenone cypionate, which is now a little bit more commonly used and favored by a decent amount of bodybuilders. And now that I think about it, I should have included the Methyl-1 testosterone in the methylated injectable steroid videos, which included Dianabol, a methylated version of boldenone, and Superdrol, a methylated version of Masterone, Trianolone, the methylated version of Trenbolone, check drops, Metribolone, the methylated version of Trestolone, also known as MENT. Man, so many abbreviations and nicknames, it gets tiresome quick. I could have included Methyl-1 testosterone, M1T, the methylated version of dihydroboldenone. I forgot to include it. My sincere apologies. I'm sure I can squeeze out another video. So I at least would like to discuss these 4 and whether they're worth taking or not, and going through the effort to source either Epistain, the Clear, Bolasterone, or M1T. But there's still a lot of compounds which might be worth taking or not. But I need you guys, your anecdotal reports, your experience down below in the comment section, so I can do a little bit additional preparation and see if these are even being used by anybody out there. Again, I can't find any evidence that people are using desoxymethyl-testosterone, abbreviated to DMT, also known as MADO, or chloro-dihydromethyl-androstenediol, CDMA, prostanozol, Ganabol, right? There's a long list of oral steroids which might have efficacy, but very limited anecdotal reports. Let me know your experience down below in the comment section. For now, I'll prepare for those 4. But if any of you guys show some sort of amazing story and let me know that it's even available nowadays, then I would do the additional research to see whether it's worth taking or not. And once I'm done with that, I'll get into the DHEA and pregnenolone deep dive, which all of you guys are so patiently waiting for. It's taking a little bit longer to prepare for, because again, I need to go through all of the scientific evidence and literature that's available on DHEA and pregnenolone. And yes, I will include a 7-keto DHEA, which, spoiler alert, only works for women, but I'll still include it in that DHEA and pregnenolone deep dive. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video, please like the video, leave a comment for the algorithm, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell button while you're at it, so you can get notified whenever a new video drops. Let's start with oxymetholone, Anadrol. Comes in very big tablets of 50 milligrams. The recommended dose, the prescription dose, is 5 milligrams per 1 kilo of body weight, which means that me, a 100 kilo bodybuilder, can get prescribed up to 500 milligrams of oxymetholone. My red blood cell count would be through the roof. My hematocrit would be borderline gravy territory. And my blood pressure and my tomato face would kind of match all of that. So I don't think dosages upwards of 300 milligrams of Anadrol are warranted. And that's only in the context of a carb loading phase. And while there's so many things you can load during a peak week, you can load carbohydrates, you can load creatine, adenosine triphosphate, which is a little bit more advanced, sodium, obviously, you can load growth hormone, and of course, the Anadrol, the Superdrol, the Halotestin all help tremendously with that, or injectable testosterone suspension also helps during the loading process. So it really depends on your preference and how many days it takes for you to start retaining water, because Anadrol, unlike Superdrol or Halotestin, does potentiate some water retention. Now, that is coming from the mineral retention that comes along with oxymetholone, but there are people out there who can run upwards of a week of Anadrol continuously. We're talking about dosages of 50 to 100 milligrams per day, and don't get any water retention, after which they do start to retain some water. So keep that in mind. There's a couple days in which you can load Anadrol, quote unquote, safely without water retention leading into a contest or a photo shoot. And that's something you need to figure out for yourself. Once you figure it out, it's highly worth it, especially if you've been dieting for a very long time, really had to crunch down your calories to bikini level caloric intake, 1500 calories, 1800 calories per day. You're fucking stringy because of the Mestanolone exposure and the thyroid medication, but you're shredded, albeit extremely flat. Anadrol, in combination with carbs and a decent amount of electrolytes, will get you back out of that state reasonably fast over the course of maybe 2 or 3 days. This is where Anadrol really shines in a pre-contest scenario where you're absolutely fucking shredded already. Now, we did review that cycle from the IFBB Pro, who shall not be named, and people still haven't figured out exactly which IFBB Pro that was. This anonymous IFBB Pro ran Anadrol into the contest, 50 milligrams, I believe at one point he was running 100 milligrams Anadrol per day. Nice, round and full, minimal water retention, but that doesn't mean that that's going to happen for you. Most people will start to retain water on Anadrol within a week. Most people would actually start to retain water within 3 days already. Keep that in mind. Anadrol is a love-hate affair because you'll love the fullness that you get out of it, but you'll hate the ability that Anadrol has by crushing your appetite. So you have to find a way around that. If you want to use Anadrol any way longer than 2 weeks in duration, I would limit it to 4 weeks maximum in duration, after which the appetite suppression and perhaps the tendency for acid reflux and some other gastro-intestinal upset will already start to manifest. So again, limit the exposure duration, ideally only a couple days before a contest or photo shoot. If you have to break through a strength plateau, in which case Anadrol is also very beneficial, just like Superdrol is highly beneficial to break through strength plateaus, or at the end of your off season where you're already eating a ton of food and you really know how to power shove already, but you still want to gain another increment on your max bench press or squat or whatever other exercise you like to break through a strength plateau in, 2 weeks, 4 weeks of Anadrol at the end, highly beneficial. Now, as we all know, Anadrol will increase your blood pressure. It's way worse during the off season when you're trying to break through a strength plateau and you expose yourself to Anadrol for weeks compared to exposing yourself to Anadrol for a couple days pre-contest when you're already fucking shredded. In that case, the blood pressure changes are going to be minimal, if any. Again, you're probably also on Mestanolone and blood pressure medications at that time. So blood pressure management on Anadrol is probably more important when you take that to break through a strength plateau in the off season when you're already eating a ton of food. And again, the mineral retention and water retention that comes along with Anadrol is going to be worse when you're eating a lot and have a high sodium and electrolyte intake compared to taking Anadrol for a few days leading into a contest or photo shoot, where every little variable is documented and detailed and carefully adjusted because, again, you're trying to peak and look your best way possible. In this context, you're probably not going to experience so much blood pressure changes. I would still recommend some sort of angiotensin receptor blocker in place or an angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor or a cyclic guanosine monophosphate specific phosphodiesterase type 5 inhibitor, Cialis, basically. Any method to control your blood pressure is mandatory when you're taking oxymetholone. Now, regarding the appetite suppression or the potential for gastrointestinal upset, when you take oxymetholone for prolonged periods of time, one of the ways around that is taking Anadrol before bed, the entire full dose in a single serving before bed on an empty stomach. That's the last thing you do of the day. Anadrol, due to its long active life and half-life, will still potentiate its effects during the day, increasing your workout capacity if you do take it to break through a strength plateau. But at least during the day while you're eating food, the gastrointestinal upset and the appetite reduction is severely diminished. Another way around that is to microdose your Anadrol with meals, which works very well during a loading phase pre-contest, again, with limited exposure duration because the dosages are going to be so freaking high. I'm talking about 12.5, 25, 50 milligrams Anadrol with each meal. Now, if you're eating 6 meals per day, that's already 300 milligrams of Anadrol per day. But if you're doing a loading phase and you're eating 10, 12 meals, small servings to really help with glycogenation of the muscle leading into the contest, maybe then 25 milligrams Anadrol is more than sufficient. Again, the total dose over that day is already 250 to 300 milligrams per day. Very, very high dosages, limited exposure duration, 2-3 days in most cases, some cases 4 days to really restore the fullness. But if you take Anadrol for, let's say, 2 weeks, 4 weeks in duration to break through a strength plateau, maybe you can take 12.5 milligrams with 4 meals, a total of 50 milligrams per day, or 25 milligrams with 4 meals, a total of 100 milligrams per day, in which case the gastrointestinal upset and the appetite suppression is less than taking the full dose pre-workout, which really seems to worsen your appetite the most and gives you acid reflux and all kinds of digestive issues. And even though that particular practice makes you the strongest, gives you the best results, from my experience, the best fullness and the best workouts, the only real way around the gastrointestinal upset and the appetite suppression, if you want to take your Anadrol all pre-workouts, is sublingual administration. And the issue with sublingual administration with Anadrol is that you're missing out on its highly androgenic metabolite being Mestanolone. That's one hell of a segue, isn't it? If you take Anadrol sublingually, it doesn't convert into Mestanolone as much as taking Anadrol orally. Washing it down with grapefruit juice would probably also inhibit the metabolization of oxymetholone into Mestanolone. And when you compare the anabolic to androgenic ratings, even though I don't really believe in the anabolic to androgenic ratings anymore. Again, I still need to make a video about that, but I keep procrastinating because, again, it's so much research to dive into, and it's going to be a very lengthy video that, well, unfortunately nowadays nobody seems to have time for anymore. Still, the anabolic rating, when you compare Mestanolone to oxymetholone, you see that the androgenicity of Mestanolone is way higher compared to oxymetholone. So if you don't want the androgenicity of oxymetholone, you take it sublingually. You would want the anabolism, obviously, so maybe a sublingual administration of oxymetholone is more suitable when you take it during the off-season, when anabolism and solely anabolism is required, because again, you're probably looking a little bit fluff because you're always in a caloric surplus. But if you do want some androgenicity, especially during contest prep, again, highly androgenic compounds are the compounds that make you look hard, dense, and full. Maybe in that case, you take your oxymetholone orally, allowing it to convert into Mestanolone, which has a much higher androgenicity compared to its parent hormone, oxymetholone. And before I forget, keep in mind that oxymetholone potentially interacts with the estrogen receptors. So if you have some pre-existing gynecomastia or high serum estradiol levels or high progestogenic activity coming from Trenbolone, Nandrolone, Ment, or check drops, right? Some of the methylated progestogenic 19-nors. If your estradiol is high, your progesterone is high, and perhaps your prolactin levels are high due to this progestogenic activity in combination with high estradiol levels, or you're smoking weed or taking kratom. If you add Anadrol on top, that's literally surgery requiring gynecomastia overnight. But if you're lean and you keep your estrogen levels within range, and you're not taking so much progestogenic 19-nors or none at all, then Anadrol has very little potential to cause gynecomastia formation. So again, contextually speaking, during the off-season when you're loaded on Nandrolone, Anadrol sublingually might still not be a good idea, because again, the tendency to exacerbate gynecomastia formation, which is probably already occurring, but you're just not noticing it yet, compared to when you take oxymetholone orally pre-contest, in which case you're probably also using aromatase inhibitors or DHT derivatives inhibiting the conversion of testosterone into estradiol, so your estradiol levels are going to be low. And even though you might take Trenbolone, alongside of that, the Mesterone inhibits some of the estrogenic burden, you're reasonably shredded. Well, you should be if you're doing a contest and adding in the oxymetholone to restore fullness. So in that particular setting, there's almost no chance that it could potentiate gynecomastia formation. Still, there might be a risk for it, so keep that in mind. And while we're on the topic of Mestanolone, even though it's available in Japan as a oral anabolic androgenic steroid, I can't find any anecdotal evidence that anybody has ever used oral Mestanolone themselves, which is a shame because Mestanolone is basically methylated dihydrotestosterone. And since we're now all on the lookout for dihydrotestosterone heptanoate or raw DHT, you can get very, very close by taking oxymetholone orally, allowing it to convert into Mestanolone, being methylated dihydrotestosterone, and still get some DHT effects. Again, oxymetholone is a DHT derivative, and so are most of the other compounds, which are known to work for longer periods of time with very unique characteristics, allowing for hardness and fullness and all of the good stuff that you want as a bodybuilder. Mestanolone apparently is available in Japan. Can't find any anecdotal evidence. Can't find any reports. Can't find any sources that carry it. So maybe you just have to metabolize oxymetholone into Mestanolone so you can get some sort of DHT-like effect out of your oxymetholone, just like you might get a DHT-like effect from your boldenone, which seems to convert into dihydroboldenone at, what was it, 1.7, 2.3, 2.7%. Pharmacodynamics change due to the delivery mechanism, and if you take your oxymetholone sublingually, you don't get any Mestanolone or very little Mestanolone out of it. So let's move over to Methenolone acetate, Primobolan-S or Rimobolan-S, also available in Japan. That's oral Primobolan. Now we already discussed Methenolone enanthate, the injectable form, extensively, my favorite injectable. So where some of the injectables are available in a methylated form as an oral steroid, Primobolan, Methenolone, injectable is Methenolone enanthate, and its oral counterpart is Methenolone acetate. So Methenolone acetate is not 17-alpha-alkylated, not methylated, would still pass through the liver, where it would get heavily metabolized, reducing the overall oral bioavailability. Why would we even take oral Primobolan when we already have beautiful injectable Primobolan, which seems to be easier to source than its oral counterpart? I can't find Methenolone acetate anywhere, just like I can't find Mestanolone anywhere. And maybe it's because it's exclusive to Japan and Japan doesn't really like to export. So maybe somebody living in Japan currently can fill the rest of us in down below in the comment section and let us all know why there's no Mestanolone or Rimobolan-S tablets available outside of Japan. Is there no exportation? Nobody there willing to make money? No underground labs shipping from Japan anywhere else? I mean, there's 1,001 of those guys living here in Thailand. They don't last long, but the next one will pop up after the previous one gets deported. Long story short, I don't see any reason why anybody would prefer to take oral Methenolone acetate over injectable Methenolone enanthate, unless you're scared of injections, in which case you're kind of a pussy. You should get away from this YouTube channel. This channel is about maximizing everything. And for that, injections, unfortunately, are required. I see all of you guys asking about oral-only cycles. Please don't do that. It's tiring. Anyway, when I talk to women who experimented with Methenolone acetate tablets, switching to injectable Methenolone enanthate, previously they would take maybe half a tablet, 12.5 milligrams Methenolone acetate tablets, once or twice per day. They would get good results, obviously. I mean, it's still an anabolic androgenic steroid. So if they were competing in higher levels of bikini or maybe figure, they would experiment with Methenolone acetate tablets. And when these female competitors start to do well, competing at higher levels of figure or maybe athletic physique, once they have some experience with oral Methenolone acetate and switch to injectable Methenolone enanthate, even at half the dose, so let's say they were running 25 milligrams acetate every day, switching to 25 milligrams injectable enanthate 3 times per week, they get better results from that with less virilization. Go figure. You take oral Methenolone acetate at higher dosages, of course resulting into virilization, but due to its pharmacodynamics changing because it's passing through the liver where it's subject to heavy metabolism, you get less muscle from Methenolone acetate at a higher dose compared to injectable Methenolone enanthate, which doesn't get metabolized, and because the dosage is lower, there's less potential for virilization, which will still occur at 75 milligrams per week, which might be required. You might have to make some sacrifices when you're competing at the higher levels of figure or women's athletic physique. Still, when you compare both in the context of a female competitor using Methenolone, half the dose of Methenolone acetate yields better results when taken in an injectable form in the form of Methenolone enanthate. And for all of you guys out there, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to replace your 500, 700, or 1,000 milligrams injectable Methenolone enanthate dose with the same dose of Methenolone acetate tablets? I don't think so. If you want to do a low-dose oral steroid, look into Anavar, look into Oxymetholone, look into Superdrol for limited exposure duration. Right? A lot better oral steroids out there. I don't see a reason why anybody would want to take Methenolone acetate unless you're scared for needles. That brings us to Halotestin, Fluoxymesterone. So is Halotestin even worth taking considering all of the other options that we have at our disposal? Yes, it's worth taking, contextually speaking, in the single instance before a contest prep when there's actually something to win. So if you do a first-timer show or a regional show or a provincial show, I don't think Halotestin is required. If you want to use something to break through a strength plateau, look into Superdrol or Anadrol instead, or Dianabol, which always has its loyal supporters. But if you're stepping on stage to win a pro card, or you're stepping on stage to win prize money or a sponsorship, if you're shredded, and only if you're absolutely shredded, Halotestin will take your physique to the next level and surely makes you win, assuming that you have the genetics and the physique and your physique is complete. Halotestin, like none other, makes you look like a fucking rock, especially in combination with Superdrol, but let's restrict us to Halotestin by itself for the context of this video. Halotestin, very anabolic, very androgenic, a short exposure duration of 20 to 30 milligrams per day for up to 2 weeks leading into the contest. You're so hard, you're so dense, you're so vascular, you're so separated, your strength increases tremendously, almost to the point you're the same strength as you were during the previous off-season, even though you're on a bikini girl diet of 1,500 to 1,800 calories per day. It restores most of your strength, restores most of your fullness, makes you aggressive like none other. And whereas with check drops, which you might use once or twice during the off-season to break through a strength plateau, again, the exposure duration is a single dose of 0.5 milligram, 1 milligram, or well, some guys push it to 2 milligrams, which I don't think is a good idea at all. With Halotestin, it's the most aggressive yet sustainable window of 2 weeks oral steroid that you can take leading into a contest. So you really need to be able to count to 10. And when I say 10, you need to count to 100 because Halotestin makes you so irritable. You're literally the Hulk. You're walking around like Bruce Banner. And at the moment's notice, you're ready to snap at the smallest thing. The smallest thing. You think tren is bad? Halotestin is tren on steroids on check drops. That's how bad it is. And within the first 2 days, you already noticed this. By day 7, you're extremely irritable and just want to be left alone 24/7. By day 14, you're ready to kill people. And that's usually by the time you step on stage. And if you're to believe all the conspiracy theorists out there saying that fluoride makes you docile and compliant because the drinking water contains fluoride, and fluoride is an active ingredient of Prozac, fluoxetine, that can't be further from the truth because Fluoxymesterone is fluorinated at the 9th position, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But it does contain fluoride. That's where the fluoxy comes from. It's basically fluorinated testosterone, which is then also methylated to prevent breakdown on the first pass through the liver. But as we all know, Halotestin makes you far from docile and far from compliant. Halotestin actually does the exact opposite. It makes you extremely uncooperative and extremely aggressive. It's like the steroid that makes all of the other steroids look like little girls. Really, it's that powerful. And that's why you should limit the exposure duration and the context of taking Halotestin to 2 weeks, 20 to 30 milligrams pre-contest only, and only when there's something to win. Now, uniquely to Halotestin, due to its 9-alpha fluorinization and 11-beta hydroxyl group, it shares structural similarities to corticosteroids. So that means that Halotestin can bind to the glucocorticoid receptors and potentiate similar effects while also inhibiting the effects of cortisol itself. So you could consider Halotestin to be a selective cortisol receptor modulator, partially agonizing and partially antagonizing the glucocorticoid receptors and perhaps the mineralocorticoid receptors as well. So with Halotestin, you prevent the binding of corticosteroids to its respective receptor, but you also get some cortisol-like effects. And besides all of that, Halotestin is also a very potent inhibitor of the 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 2 enzymes, which ultimately metabolize cortisol into cortisone and corticosterone into 11-dehydrocorticosterone, which are basically biologically inactive. And thus, Halotestin inhibits the deactivation of glucocorticoids, corticosteroids, resulting in overactivation of the glucocorticoid receptors and perhaps overactivation of the mineralocorticoid receptors, resulting in water retention, hypertension, and other side effects commonly associated with glucocorticoids. This might also mean that you get partial to complete inhibition of cortisol-induced protein catabolism, certainly to a much higher extent compared to oxandrolone and trembolone, which are also known to antagonize the glucocorticoid receptors, inhibiting the negative effects that cortisol might have on muscle protein breakdown. Halotestin is probably the most potent from a long-term perspective. Again, Methylbolone or Trianolone might be more potent in their effects, but those can only be taken in a single dose, and Halotestin can be taken upwards to 2 weeks leading into a contest. There's a lot of overlap between Halotestin and the glucocorticoid receptors. Keep that in mind. You might experience a ton of side effects or none at all. Ideally, you only take Halotestin when you're already super lean and you got something in place to control your blood pressure. You're really on top of your mineral and electrolyte intake. Make sure that that stays as stable as possible. Again, Halotestin will make you strong and aggressive, makes you almost as strong as you were at the end of off-season. So you really have to make sure that your blood pressure stays manageable by focusing on your electrolytes and perhaps an ARB or an ACE inhibitor or a PDE5 inhibitor. Keep that all in check because during the workouts, your blood pressure might be sky high. Keep that in mind, guys. Halotestin is meant to be respected. It's meant to be earned. And when you've earned it by getting down to 4 or 5% body fat levels, and you've put in a tremendous amount of work to get you to that highest level of competition when there's actually something to win, there's nothing like Halo, baby. And I'll leave it here. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can find everything that I'm associated with down below in the description section. Have a look at some of my sponsors and affiliates. Use those discount codes so you can save yourself some money while shopping online. Have a look at my website, vigoroussteve.com. Check out the latest articles. A lot of extra information that I don't present here on the YouTube channel. It's all free. Head over to vigoroussteve.com, bookmark the article section so you can read a ton more high quality information on your own leisure time. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at VigorousSteve. Vigorous crew, you guys know what to do. Hit that like button like you're on Halotestin. Hit it hard, but hit it once. A front double bicep for you guys. Imagine if I added in a little bit of Oxymetholone. Oh, a man can dream, right? I'll leave it here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.